and welcome back to Techweek TV, brought to you by Callaghan Innovation. My name's Alicia, I'm the Festival Manager here at Techweek. Now today I am joined by Ian and Lisa. We've got an amazing subject we're going to be covering off today called Tour 250, a nation born of sailors. So this is an amazing journey we're going to be taken on, so we welcome any questions from those watching online. But over to you, Ian and Lisa, we welcome your story.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Well, I thought that actually, seeing this as Tech Week, we should start first with the word that this is all about, technology. So the really interesting thing is, right through this week, I'm pretty sure that most conversations have treated technology like it's something new. And actually in the European world, the word technology actually first appeared in a dictionary in 1901. And that's kind of interesting because it's a new word for Europeans, and this is the description that we had of it. Technology. Here we go.
Technology's not working.
I know why. It's not turned on.
Turn it on.
Look at that. I should turn it on. That just proves I know nothing about technology. Let's go this one. So here's the description of technology in that 1901. The application of scientific knowledge for practical purposes. And I think that this is probably a really great example.
Centuries ago, our mighty ancestors explored this great planet in giant waka, often in crews of more than 100 men and women. They were astronomers who mapped the stars and ocean currents using sophisticated charts that they committed to memory for those long months in unexplored waters. From China to the Philippines, Indonesia to the Pacific Islands, after millennia of migration across a third of the planet, they eventually arrived in Aotearoa.
And Lisa, I mean, this is your area of expertise. That is an incredible voyage, isn't it?
That truly, I mean, as an anthropologist who studies human migrations worldwide, this voyage, this great voyage across the Pacific, really is one of the greatest feats in human history.
See, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because this year we're commemorating the arrival of Captain Cook on these shores just 250 years ago. But this journey was happening thousands of years, wasn't it?
Indeed, thousands of years. I mean, beginning in Africa, but ultimately coming into the Pacific, you know, in the last few thousand years, beginning 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, and ultimately arriving here in Aotearoa.
And it's incredible, isn't it? Because, you know, I often think back to my school days, and even school days today. This journey, this incredible voyage, was sort of in our myths, you know, Māori myths and technology, and usually dismissed as being those fanciful stories because it could never have happened. But you're proving that it did.
Well, you know, technology is allowing us to see this story. So in a sense, it doesn't need to be proven because we know that it happened, and certainly it's in the oral traditions. But by applying, in my case, the latest technology from DNA analysis, DNA technology, we're actually reconstructing these stories, and we're seeing the amazing way that they're merging with traditional knowledge and telling the same story.
And you know, it's one of the things I reflect on. I was born in 1950, so in a house without electricity, actually. And you know, as we look at these stories and the stories that you're uncovering using science today, what really stands out is that none of these stories were told in our schools as I grew up, and still not today. And you know, this Tech Week that we're celebrating, there's a big question that we have to ask, is why is it that Māori and Pacifica are so underrepresented in this future, you know, the future of all of us?
When it was their ancestors that were actually using the greatest technology and demonstrating those abilities.
Yes, and Lisa, this is the idea around Tour 250, the voyage. We've had 250 years where these stories have been denied, not just Māori and Pacifica, but denied the whole country. And it has to stop this year. This is where we have to start looking at this. You know, let's retake this. This is kind of what we're celebrating this week. It's also the core of our education system: science, technology, engineering, math, STEM. And again, coming back to Māori and Pacifica, you wonder why it is that we don't perform that well. It's because these stories have been denied them, that this is in their DNA, and actually this is what it should read. STEAM. I mean, just imagine, I'm going full steam ahead. Our education system going full steam ahead because we've added art. I often think, and you know, that when Captain Cook arrived, and giving him the benefit of the doubt, he arrived here, there were no books, there were no writings, so this must have been some kind of savage, you know, native things that needed Western culture to come and lift them out of where they were. He didn't realise, and in fact that's happened for 250 years. You know, the art is mātauranga Māori.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you've sort of, you know, and I think this is what's really important about bringing this to our kids, because particularly in Pacifica and Māori, they need to understand that this stuff is in their DNA. It's just been denied them for 250 years. And that kind of attitude that came also banned our language in the schools and the education system right from the outset. We're on a hiding to nothing, weren't we?
Absolutely. I think, you know, that integration of arts and science, STEM and mātauranga Māori, you know, Western and traditional knowledge is the way forward. It's that gives us the much fuller picture of life, of the world, and we should be celebrating that.
Yes, and so this picture here is the classic.
The classic. Sadly, it's a classic. It's a great Goldie painting
It's a Goldie?
It's a Goldie painting that is in people's minds. It was a reflection of the perspective at the time. It was a copy of another traditional voyage of Medusa or something. So, but it was putting that story of the colonization, the founding, the arriving canoes on the shores of Aotearoa and the starving people.
Because we were blown, it's an accident.
This image, and that story has been maintained through through the school books, through people's mindsets.
It's still here today. A very famous sailor, New Zealand sailor, who shall remain nameless, once said to me that, you know, I should get over this idea that my ancestors came here on a voyage of discovery. What happened was they went out, probably had too much kava, went fishing, fell asleep, woke up, couldn't see the shores, didn't know where they were, and got blown here with that depiction. That's today.
Yeah.
And that kind of story has got to stop, hasn't it?
It is, yeah.
This is the stuff that you're dealing with now.
I mean,
That's how they did it,
it's been driving the narrative, you know, not only from a New Zealand identity, a Maori and Pacific identity, but through biology as well. The biologists are using this to explain some of the patterns that we're seeing, you know, these small canoe loads of people who got blown onto an island and were isolated, and everything that we're finding from the research that we're doing in human genetics and archaeology and applying the latest Western technology to this. We're seeing that this story really is a myth, is a great myth, that people were not isolated, that they were great voyagers who could return to their islands, and that has huge implications for understanding our biology, our history, our social structure, and celebrating, in a sense, the technology and the skill of humans at this point in time, of Pacific peoples, thousands of years ago.
Yeah, and you keep coming back to this thing, this lost opportunity for 250 years. Because I guess, I mean, you're finding it as well, that probably Māori, with this other culture that arrived, the stories were oral, then your language got banned in schools, the stories were in your art, and so there's almost a hunkering down where the stories stopped being told as well. Is that right?
Absolutely, as I say, and it's pervasive. We can all celebrate the great human migrations. If we look at the map that we're now constructing of human migrations out of Africa, we see through DNA. And it was actually a great New Zealander who recognized with technology we could use DNA and mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through the maternal line. We won't get too technical, but it was Alan Wilson and his team of
do we have that slide?
Do we have the
that we can
slide?
show the
Yeah.
viewers?
This. So, oh, sorry. Yes, this is the.
So
Amazing.
we can trace our ancestry back to Africa, and as modern humans migrated across the globe, everybody knows about this story, hears about this story. The human migration story is in the textbooks for biology, but they often forget the kind of end picture of the last great migration of people crossing the continents and walking through Asia and down into Australia and New Guinea 60,000 years ago. This is when humans began this migration. But the migration out into the Pacific was the last major migration of humans, and it's the one that really required the technology.
Yeah.
All of the other migrations people could walk, but in order to get out through the islands of Southeast Asia and into the islands of the Pacific, which are separated by great expanses of water, required technology. And Pacific peoples were doing this beginning 3,000
and
or 5,000 years ago.
You can tell I'm in charge of the click. I just get so enthralled I forget to click. But let's just go back, because these thousands of years ago, these are state-of-the-art craft, aren't they?
Absolutely.
This required STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. We just didn't call it that. That's kind of just new.
Totally.
Yeah.
It was Mātauranga Māori.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating, I mean, it's interesting when we look at this process of getting across this great expanse of the Pacific.
I think I know where you're going.
Most people don't. You just see it on a map and it doesn't really sink in. Again, we have such a Eurocentric view of the world.
Which is
but
why
if
you
we
put
look at
this one in Europe.
And when you see this beautiful map, which I saw on Air Tahiti Nui, that shows the islands of French Polynesia overlain on a map of Europe. So you can see the islands there. And
that area takes up that huge area of Europe.
From Scandinavia down to the Mediterranean, from the British Isles all the way across Western Europe. That is just French Polynesia.
And if you I love this.
If you look at just that region in the circle, that is the distance. So Pacific peoples were traveling 4 times the distance of crossing Europe, and they're doing it within a matter of hundreds of years. And
That's staggering.
3,000 years ago.
Wow.
It is, and I mean, just to put that in perspective, that little red circle is that big, Europe.
That's the distance.
And big hunk of Europe would fit in there.
Basically.
And we in schools, what did I learn about? I learnt about the migrations, the Genghis Khans and all of the Romans, all of those stories, and they travelled in this little tiny area compared to what our ancestors, and I say our ancestors, our ancestors were doing thousands of years before that.
The same time period that Polynesians are making these voyages across thousands and thousands of kilometers, the Phoenicians, who are often held up as the greatest sailors and voyagers, were hugging the coasts of the Mediterranean and sailing around the Mediterranean. And it was an amazing feat that they actually possibly got through the Straits of Gibraltar and up as far as Britain. But it's all coastal sailing.
See, that is so right, because I remember the New Zealand author James Belich in his great study of New Zealand, making peoples. So he talked about 2 vessels, and this probably simplifies it a bit. 400 AD, 2 vessels that were 100 men, women, children sailing out. One in the northern hemisphere, one in the southern hemisphere. The one in the northern hemisphere, the Vikings, making that kind of little cosy wee journey around the coast, popping across to the UK. The other one was our ancestors doing the kind of journeys you're talking about.
The greatest
journeys. And again, the thing you come back to is, in school, I only learnt about the Vikings and the Romans. This stuff was dismissed. And we talk about colonialisation and stuff, and this takes it back to, I think, to a really basic level. You have denied our rangatahi, this story that tells them that they are part of one of the great science, technology, engineering, math, mataranga Māori in the world.
Absolutely.
And I love this. So this is because this friend of mine who told me we've
Say
got
no
one.
names.
No names. But he has sailed around the world. So this is something we do for the Volvo Ocean Race, and I just want to compare this. So here we go around the Volvo Ocean Race. They've had to put satellites up and amongst the stars, and here's the big GPS units on the back that get their message from the stars. Sends that message downstairs to the guys sitting downstairs on their computers, all to figure out where they are. That's it. They put satellites up there, they've got all of this technology, and they think they're really clever crossing the oceans using that. Our ancestors did it this way. You explain what...
They were doing it thousands of years ago. By reading the environment. The ocean wasn't a barrier to Pacific people. And we often think that way, where we have a very Eurocentric, a very continental perspective where, yes, people can walk across mountains and they're going to do that because there's always because it was there, what's on the other side of it. But the oceans were barriers. But for Pacific people, this is their environment. It's a continuity between...
That's right. It is. It's Papa Tunuku, Rangi and Papa. They aren't separate.
Totally.
They are the one. And I mean, I never thought of it in that context till you explained it. And it is. We travel like this on the land. We step onto the water, and Papa Tunuku has given us other signs. What are those? They didn't have to put satellites up there.
They had stars.
Rangi was there.
They had
he
the
gave
stars.
You the stars.
And they knew the rising and setting stars. The navigators passed this information down. They knew what the signs were of migrating birds. So if you have seasonal migrations and you're seeing birds, you know that there's land in that direction. They knew which birds were found at what distances from land. They could feel, they could feel the ocean. They were much more in tune, I think, to their environment. Obviously, not everybody. This was knowledge that was passed down, and not through textbooks, but through those oral traditions and that training, and that their STEM. That was their system of passing that knowledge through generations. And all you need is a break in that one or two generations, and that information's gone. And
that's our risk. And I think, tying this to 250. I mean, I know a lot of Māori look at this celebration of so-called celebration or commemoration of Captain Cook arriving here as being wrong. But we could take that other look, that this is the time to start uncovering the stories that Captain Cook and Europeans totally missed when they arrived here the first time.
Except that Tupaia, of course,
Tupaia had to bring him in.
was getting cooked down here. And again, the maps. People have been able to go back and look at Tupaia's maps and see how they fit again in a different perspective, a different world view of where you are and where you're going, as opposed to a traditional map. So it took people a while to kind of make sense of Tupaia's maps, that he was able to draw from his mental map.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people look at as they have this aerial view that was impossible in those days. But actually, you were explaining to me, if that was the way you viewed the universe, you could look at it from this angle and know the other. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, if you're used to seeing everything written down, if you come from a culture that is a written culture and you're seeing it in 2D versus a 3D way of placing yourself within the world, you will have a different perspective. And so it might seem supernatural to have, to be able to then take that and put it onto a 2D surface.
You mentioned our oral history, and in a way, misunderstanding the oral history, which we've all done. I've done it. You take the story of Maui. So Maui fished up the North Island.
Right.
We all know that story. So we know it's not possible either. So it's just a myth. It's a legend, but actually, It's a metaphorical way. It's how we tell our stories so they are never forgotten. And a Māori elder was telling me the other day, if you have oral histories, you exaggerate, you make gods do this so they are never forgotten. You don't want to tell an ordinary story, but someone was telling me that actually the fishing up wasn't fishing up, that they knew this island was out there from the things you were saying, the birds, the flight of birds. It's out there somewhere. The signs are there. So the fishing line was cast, hooked the island, and you fished your way to it.
The island.
You didn't fish it up.
Right.
You fished to it because you knew it was there.
But even the description of the North Island of Te Ika Maui and the Waka and the South Island, people say, oh, you know, how would they have known that shape? Well, again, if they're investigating their environment, they're exploring that as part of their whole process of settlement and discovery, of colonization. They've got that mental map.
And they're still doing it, isn't it? I mean,
and they're still doing it.
And you had somebody on this one.
A colleague of mine who's a brilliant photographer, Danny Hazama, took these amazing photos during these voyages of rediscovery, really, using traditional technology and knowledge, the navigational skills that thankfully there were a few people left on.
I mean, it's still very delicate to hold on to this incredible legacy. And you were telling me about the one person,
Mao.
Mao. Tell me about that. That was
the great navigator. As I say, because people weren't allowed to tell these stories, it was discouraged, and it was somehow mythology rather than technology, rather than science, rather than history, and so forth. That it was lost in many traditional societies around the Pacific, but there were a few people who still maintained, who were able to keep that knowledge alive and passing it down. And so one of these men was discovered on the island of Satawal.
Where's that?
In Micronesia.
Micronesia.
And he kind of was brought to Hawaii, and this was where we started to have the resurgence of the Polynesian navigational skills, and he started teaching other young Hawaiians and other Polynesians about those skills and reintroducing it. And then we started having the hokulea traveling around the world, not only just traveling through Polynesia and showing that this was possible. We had to have Thor Heyerdahl, a European, building a balsa wood raft and suggesting that people, it had to have been the people from South America who came out into the Pacific.
So I'd forgotten about him because he was all over our history lessons.
Thor
Heyerdahl.
Yeah.
Kupe, Thor Heyerdahl. I mean, it's really interesting when and put this in context. Kupe. Well, actually, we can talk about Kupe in a minute, but that singular. But this voyage here is the equivalent of man on the moon, man going to the moon. The journey that they made across this is absolutely the equivalent of that up there. And I think what's really cool about it is we looked out at the moon, knew it was there, and had to design technology to get to it. Well, our ancestors also knew it was out there. Also knew. So it's the same thing. And they designed the technology, they designed the science, the mataranga Māori that was needed, and they made that spectacular journey at a time when, in those other places that we give credit for sailing, they're still pottering around the edges of the land. It's incredible. And I think in the context of Tuia 250, the other anniversary that is this year is the 50th anniversary of man landing on the moon. We have a 50th anniversary of man landing on the moon, and no anniversary of Kupe or that bigger group that
So Ian, for those watching at home, Tuia 250, can you talk about kind of what it is?
We're coming to that.
Perfect. I like it. Perfect.
Yeah, we're coming to that.
There's lots of messages coming in from people, so I think they're really starting to take you. You're obviously taking them on the journey already. So that's brilliant.
So let me take the next step is it is this Māori worldview. This is what we have been talking about today. There is this different view of the universe, ko ngā tāhua o tapawai nānei. Hei to ira ora mo a popo. I often joke about this. So if you used to listen to Guy Nesbitt on Radio New Zealand, you don't need me to translate that. If you listen to Mike Hoskins, we've got a translation for you. The footprints laid down by our ancestors centuries ago create the paving stones of where we stand today. And that worldview is, for me now, I only discovered this 2 years ago. I've reflected on all of those things, the footsteps, and it just makes the future really understandable. I mean, it's not a mystery anymore. These things are all laid out in front of you. And the really cool thing in your case is we have this many footsteps in this culture, don't we?
It's
3,350 years of footsteps.
And that's just, as I say, that last migration, that's getting across the Pacific. So, you know, this is, I mean, it's an interesting perspective. I'm an anthropologist, an evolutionary anthropologist, and, you know, we use, as I say, technology, but it's that same thing. We've got to understand our past. We've got to understand where we came from in order to really move forward.
Isn't that interesting? That is a European concept, but it's actually always in the thing that the past is still back here. If you don't understand the past, you won't understand the future. Actually, the Māori worldview where the past is always in front of you. Always.
Yep.
You know, that's incredible. So, again, these are the years.
So basically, I mean, when we look at this expansion, our story of the migrations to arrive in Aotearoa, this is part of a bigger Pacific migration, of course, that really begins back about, we say, the earliest Lapita sites. It's connected to the Lapita culture, which is the ancestral Pacific
This is what
culture.
you're studying in your
And this
research.
is my research, yeah. And that basically the earliest Lapita sites occur just in what is today New Guinea and the Bismarck Archipelago, 3,350 years ago. So this was really the beginning of the migration into the Pacific out of island Southeast Asia, people coming out of island Southeast Asia, probably beginning around 5,000 years ago. And they move out into, if we go back to the previous, So they arrive in the Bismarck Archipelago where there had been people for 40,000 years, 50,000 years. But those people didn't get out, they got through the Solomon Islands, but didn't get out into the really, what we call remote Oceania, the islands that include Polynesia, but also New Caledonia, Vanuatu, Fiji. When the people arrived there 3,000 years ago, they were the first people to arrive on this land. And in order to get out to remote Oceania, to settle these islands, and ultimately they get to the edge of the Polynesian Triangle and Samoa and Tonga by 2,900 years ago. So just within a few hundred years, they get across these vast distances to the edge of the Polynesian Triangle. That required a different kind of technology and a different kind of mindset, because when you're sailing out into remote Oceania, you're sailing out of sight of land. Within the Bismarck Archipelago and the Solomons, you never leave sight of land. When you'll set off, you can say, we're going to that island over there. But to get beyond the Solomon Islands, you actually have to sail into what we interpret as the unknown.
That would have been in the times when the cultures, the idea of the Earth being flat was still prevalent, wasn't it?
Well, absolutely. Yes.
I'm not very good at that. So everywhere else they thought the Earth was flat, this culture knew it wasn't.
We don't necessarily know that
they're
it
brave
wasn't,
enough to go to the edge of it.
But they're going beyond. But we also have to think people are people, and people don't generally have a death wish and just go out hoping to find something. And what we've actually found is that both looking at the speed of settlement, that just within a few hundred years people can get all the way across from New Guinea to Samoa and Tonga. The speed at which they did that indicates that this wasn't just chance, just people hoping to find land. There was a real strategy about the exploration of that vast ocean that lay in front of them, and an awareness of the environment, of the winds and the currents and the seasonality. And so what we think, and this is work that's been been done by colleagues starting at the University of Auckland, Jeff Irwin, and these computer simulations, and now people are doing this around the world. We realized that as people were moving across the Pacific, they're sailing generally into the wind. We have the trade winds that are coming from the east. So anybody who sails knows that that's a difficult direction, but it's always easy to get home with the winds. So it's actually a systematic process and a safe process where people are sailing into the wind, and we think they sail in a particular direction for a particular period of time. Your sailors, your navigators, your men with this knowledge and this understanding,
and for that journey.
And they know how long they're going to go out. If they don't find land, they know how to get home. They know from the stars what direction they're sailing and how to get back home.
And they've got the wind.
And they've got the wind.
It's a little bit like today. The planes that we fly in, they always have enough fuel to take you back, either to a place, will take you back to somewhere you know.
Yeah.
You know? And this, we put this in, we're talking thousands of years ago, and we are having this huge celebration this year for somebody who arrived here just 250 years ago. You can't tell this story this year without uncovering the real story behind the journey, the first journey to Aotearoa, can you?
Yeah.
And then there's this, because you talk about this as the...
So as I say, that all the evidence indicates, all the scientific, all of the Western science from archaeology, from computer simulations show that there was, the speed at which they were moving and the timing of what we can see of settlement fits into this safe sailing corridor. In a sense, it was almost it's been described as
the triangle you've got.
That if you look at the center, as people are moving out, you've got a continuous lot of islands.
Yes, yeah.
And so you're
we're
sailing,
at the wrong end of that, aren't we?
And we're at the wrong end of that. That's safe sailing, return voyaging. You go out, you find your island.
Right.
And those aren't your colonists. Those are your navigators, your explorers. They go back, and then they take their colonists. Then they know where they're going to. They take them to the island. They know what the resources are that are on that island that they're going to, so they know what they have to take with them in order to establish their settlements.
It's a little bit the whole discussion of sending somebody to the moon to figure out how you live it before or Mars.
Exactly. You don't send your colonists in those first, those first rocket ships.
And we bow down to Elon Musk, for this idea or Jeff Bezos of going to Mars, when here in our own country we had equally the equivalent, didn't we?
And especially when you start looking at moving up to Hawaii or down to Aotearoa.
Yes, that's the
sailing
bit,
north and south. That's much more unpredictable. That's much more of a challenge in a sense of not that safe. We know that there's always another island out there, to the east as we're moving across. There's always been another island. There's always been another island. Sailing north and south is much more dangerous. But of course, there were signs. There were signs that there was, with the migrating birds, Taupo erupting, Raoul erupting. You've got, all of these major natural indicators of their land being down there. But it's also, it's a different environment, so it's not as easy to sail back and forth. So we don't think that there was as much. We certainly know that there was continuous voyaging. Even when Cook arrived, people were moving around the Society Islands back and forth, and there was Coupe's knowledge. The knowledge of the navigators of where the various islands were. But Aotearoa by that point was relatively isolated.
Yeah, and it was the last.
It was the last place that was settled. So, so if we have this process of sailing into the wind into Polynesia, a rapid expansion, safe sailing, systematic settlement, and ultimately, as we say, people get across the Pacific fairly quickly, expanding. After a few thousand years, we had people in Samoa and Tonga 3,000 years ago. People didn't move out into the rest of the Polynesian Triangle until about 1,200 years ago, and up to Hawaii around 1,000, maybe 1,200 years ago, down to Aotearoa 750 years ago.
But just because we didn't really introduce you, just to put it
into context.
Into context. Hawaii is where you're from. That's
I was born in Hawaii. That's why.
Hawaii, and that's
but it is the Polynesian Triangle defined by Hawaii, Aotearoa and Rapa Nui. in the east.
And it is the great last migration.
It is
right?
the great last. It
last
is. This
discovery.
was, Aotearoa was the last place that was settled by humans. We have the shortest history of human occupation in the world.
And again, just to understand, we're celebrating. Well, not celebrating. We are commemorating 250 years this year. What was the gap?
500 years.
Yeah.
500 years. People had discovered Aotearoa long before Cook.
I can still remember growing up in school where the debate was, did Captain Cook discover it or that guy from Holland, the Dutchman? I can still remember growing up. It was sort of like my ancestors were just here and they were really dumb and savages and ate each other. That's the stories we got. And I think you've discovered too, haven't you, that that kind of oppression of that knowledge has placed us at great risk because, I mean, I didn't know it. I mean, I'm sure there are thousands and thousands of Māori Pacificans sitting out there, if they were watching this now, wouldn't have any knowledge of this. And it's such a precarious place we are still in. And if we don't, and that's where we get to 250, if we don't take this opportunity to tell these untold stories, then we are failing our moko, our rangatahi, entirely.
And we're failing. We're failing
world,
science.
actually.
We're failing the world.
world.
Exactly. It's not, I mean, it's such an important story that everybody benefits from that.
Tell me, you told me as we were coming here, the magazine, the acceptance of this.
So, I mean, I think we've got some slides.
We'll do that when I come.
Yeah.
I'm just getting really excited. I'm very excitable. So I just want to address this whole 250 idea. So part of the celebration is that in August, what are they called from Tahiti? Waka haurua here, but anyway, Waka are leaving in August to come down to New Zealand. The Endeavour, or the replica of the Endeavour, leaves Sydney to come across to New Zealand, and at Cape, Young Next Head, I think, Waka haurua sail out to meet them. So 250 years after Captain Cook, this journey is being repeated.
Amazing.
And I just wonder, if 250 years ago Captain Cook had the benefit of the knowledge that Lisa has shared with us today, what might the following 250 years look like? The ones leading today. And we have this incredible opportunity to go, well, actually, what might the next 250? So anyway, they come. So what we've decided to do, we're still trying to figure out how we pay for it, and the boats leave in August, but one way or another we are going to do this. So this is the technology we use for tracking yachts around the world for the Volvo Ocean Race. So we did this over a 10-month period. So we've had this idea, and we've worked with Volvo, and we've nicked and begged and stolen gear off Volvo boats, and we're going to put them on the Waka that leave Tahiti. I'm not sure we've told them yet either. We're working on that. So anyway, we're going to do that. We're trying to get Sir Peter Blake's son free, James Blake. James Blake is the most amazing sailor, storyteller, photographer, travels with drones, and he did the Volvo Ocean Race. Wow. So we want him on that vessel, coming down, telling us stories as we track using graphics like this. And the irony is, in order for us to tell this story, we have to put all this technology on so that we can tell you where those boats are. Meanwhile, the Polynesian navigator sitting on there are doing it without any of it. Isn't that cool?
It is.
It's excellent. So anyway, so what we want to do, so we want to track that down, then we're going to put a crew on the Endeavour, bring that through, and we have 3.5 months of, so the big worry for me about 250 is it happens this year and there is no legacy left. And we sail around, we have a few parties on a few beaches and, a few functions, and next year it's gone. Well, what we are talking about here is creating a legacy for our moko, for our rangatahi. So this platform that we build, as we travel down, just like we do in the America's Cup, you'll go online and it's down to here and there's a little sign there, you click on this, up comes this story video, and we start telling these stories that you've shared with us today as we cross.
Amazing.
And the idea is it stays forever, that all of our kids after this will be able to go and tell these stories. And I was always worried about what kind of stories we could tell, but you're just one source of these stories, and we could fill this journey easily, couldn't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's fantastic. So just moving on, we'll come back to that in a minute, but
I mean, this is, my goal is that, as I say, this story is one of the greatest stories of human history, and it needs to be in the textbooks, and it's starting to be appearing in the scientific literature, but we've got to get it out to the general public, and this is where it's exciting. But I mean, we can see using the latest technology, whether it's DNA technology, which is what I use, or if we look at this map here, this is a colleague of mine who's an archaeologist who's sourcing
You must
stone.
come together. We'll start making you some better maps.
That's why we need your technology, your knowledge. Bring this all together. Yeah, this is what we do. But it's looking at now we have the evidence to track these migrations, not only just settlement, but the trade and exchange networks that were in existence.
See, that's the important thing, isn't it? That this was never a one-way journey. These people traded.
Yeah, and we can see that they're moving this wonderful basalt source for making adzes and things, across archipelagos, thousands of kilometers, and we see this through the DNA, through the chemical analysis of the stone. And then I started using this, looking at DNA of the rats on the next slide.
This is fabulous.
And this is where I came at it from a typical Western perspective. Where I'm saying, using the technology of the great New Zealand scientist Alan Wilson and looking at DNA, in particular this mitochondrial DNA, which he had shown with human DNA, people coming out of Africa and migrating around the world. I started using the DNA of the Kiore, the Pacific rat, Rattus excellens, that was one of these animals that was part of
We'll go back to that.
Pacific system of settlement, and that planned settlement. People were taking plants and animals with them in their waka. But I was introduced to this little Kiore by some Maori colleagues who told me not only about this rat and the fact that it was a completely different species from European rats.
This is not the rat that stowed away on ships.
No, it is not. It was an animal, and these colleagues, Dr. Mere Roberts and Professor Ranginui Walker and Hori Parata from Ngāti Wai. When I started doing my research for my PhD on DNA of this rat, they were the ones who told me the stories about the Kiore and about its importance in Pacific society, Pacific traditions, oral traditions, and the fact, of course, at the time, the Treaty of Waitangi, the Y262 claim was being put in for Kaitiakitanga ownership over out of the native flora and fauna, that Maori had a relationship and had a right to this and owned this knowledge. And so we started having conversations where they shared this information with me, and it was this bringing together of traditional knowledge and information about the role of this animal with scientific technology and being able to track the DNA that we told the story that brought depth and drove the whole story in the first place.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because again, in that kind of the culture we live in today, everyone asks for the evidence.
The evidence was there in oral traditions.
In oral tradition.
But it wasn't until we could somehow show it with DNA technology, with Western science, and it was really frustrating in a way to see that you don't need the Western science to prove this, but the fact that it does, and we could track where did the waka come from by finding out where the Kiore came from, that we started again to see the evidence of these interaction networks and how the Kiore that arrived here, that are the Kiore today, are the descendants of the Kiore that arrived in those traditional waka.
And they're different.
They are different. They do not interbreed with the European rats.
That's
unlike
classy.
people, you know, we share our genes.
Yeah.
The other animals that people brought here, the kuri, the dog, interbreeds with the European dogs.
And that's important in some of the discussions you have with the Department of Conservation now, because they went on the anti-rat. And
a rat is a rat is a rat.
A rat is,
Rats are bad.
Get rid of them, but that's not the case, is it?
No, I mean, and this is to say the value of bringing traditional knowledge of relationships and that connectedness to the world. I was educated, really. I was so lucky that my colleagues were willing to share this information, that kiore are taonga. They are, and if you show the next.
Yes.
This is a carving from the marae at the University of Auckland, and this is Ruanui, one of the navigators, with the kiore traveling on a shoulder. This is not a pest. This is a traveling companion. Wow. And this actual picture of this carving made the cover of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the USA, the study that we did on using the kiore as a marker for tracking migrations through the Pacific. This is, and it was this combination of traditional knowledge that told me about the kiore as a taonga. Why would people bring a rat? That must be a stowaway. It's like, no, it's not a stowaway. And
so, yes.
It was an intention, and the traditions talk about the kiore being brought intentionally, being transported in a waka kiore, in a container.
Its own waka.
And if you look at the biology of the rats, they don't like wet conditions. They don't like having their feet wet. They don't, they and they didn't travel in European boats. So they, all of this fits with the traditional knowledge that they were brought intentionally. And why would somebody bring something, that we think of as a dirty, disease-carrying thing? It's a different animal. It's a bush animal.
And you see, again, we may have been the last place colonized or had discovered, but this stuff, the magazine, the stuff, we are sending lessons. We are sharing. We have the ability to share this knowledge with the world from here,
and to demonstrate the value of that engagement and the importance of having that different perspective.
So that brings me to one of my pet gripes, and there's a counsellor who is not worthy of even being named on the Otago Regional Council, who has just come out spitting and gnawing and screaming at the idea of the privilege that Māori expect when they say there should be 2 Māori on the Otago Regional Council board. There should be a space for 2 Māori. And we get that white colonial, if they deserve to be here, they'll be here. We'll vote them in on our system. That's what we'll do. And actually what your discovery with Nowacki Waka, all those people, they have this knowledge that we needs to be at every table.
Yeah, absolutely. A perspective that is so valuable. And especially being able to work together and take that, use that knowledge for,
yes, we shouldn't,
all purposes.
I mean, our next 250s, we should be recognising the power of these 2 things together, shouldn't we? And that this is,
it's like, why would people bring this? And again, we have this information. People are bringing it because it's an important food item. It was a value. It helped people survive. This was, again, part of a major strategy that Pacific people had in terms of adapting and bringing the resources that they needed with them, bringing their important cultural, iconic species. People are people. Europeans did the same thing. We brought things that were familiar to us, whether it's gorse or whether it's they may be things
rabbits
and rabbits.
Because there was a purpose for them. We just didn't realise the unintended consequences, but there was always a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that comes to this nation born of sailors. While we talk about Captain Cook, and I may have been dismissing him a little bit that he only arrived 250 years ago, but actually this country is a nation born of sailors, not just our Polynesian ancestors, but the European, everybody else who came. It's just we need to correct this myth that
absolutely.
he discovered it. Now, Wairau Bar.
one of the earliest sites, you know, in New Zealand. People arrived here, so extremely well dated now to 750 years ago.
I never realised, but I probably have to move along a bit.
We do a little bit. We're down to about 5 minutes.
Oh my God! Well, we've got to get to the end anyway. So,
you know, and what we're finding from the archaeology, from these collaborations, from the DNA analysis, from all of this story coming together, is that the settlement of Aotearoa was a great story, and it was a strategic settlement.
That site was picked specifically because they'd explored everything.
Well, people made strategic decisions that gave them access to resources.
And the discoveries of DNA is proving this stuff.
And working with the iwi, again, together with Rangatane o Warau, we've been able to do the DNA analysis of the people, the tupuna who were buried at Warabar, and what we see is significant genetic variation, which again supports the story that it's not a single canoe load of people.
We should
who
have
are
given
isolated.
it 2 hours.
Totally.
So this is the ocean going.
And more recent discoveries. This is the Nowacki Waka that was discovered in the dunes and is now being conserved.
But I love this picture that you gave us. Look at that.
It's the carving of the turtle. And
I mean, we don't have turtles.
This is one of the great. This is still an ocean-going waka, and we have the history and those connections to the Pacific, to the turtle. The radiocarbon dates show that this is part of the very early period of you know, just after Warabar, one of the earliest sites. The canoe and the caulking in the canoe dates to that.
And here they are. This is what you're...
And then they've been able to do a reconstruction again. This is Jeff Irwin and Dilys Johns reconstructing what that canoe would have looked like, and then building replicas that they can actually put into those wind tunnels and test how maneuverable these waka were. And you know...
That was the thing that really scared Captain Cook, wasn't it? He arrived here and these waka were sailing around him.
And again,
I mean, you shouldn't have been able to do that, but they were sailing around him.
And this is New Zealand science.
Yeah.
New Zealand and celebrating traditional knowledge, you know, in the top ranked journals, scientific journals in the world. So this is our, you know, putting our stamp.
So sort of, I probably will sit and talk to you all day. It's just, but these are the stories that we want to put into this platform that will be the legacy for our young people. So just coming back, the footsteps of our ancestors laid down centuries ago create the paving stones of where we stand today. So here's the really, really cool thing about this Tuia 250 journey. So the Endeavour, the waka from Hawaii, from Tahiti, they travel around the country for 3.5 months and they finish on Mahia Peninsula. Mahia Peninsula, the first place on the planet to see the light of a new day, but also the place where in a relationship between Māori and Pākehā, Peter Beck and Rocket Lab, we are sending state-of-the-art craft. Just like the state-of-the-art craft that came here, we are sending state-of-the-art craft back to the stars that brought us here.
Wow, that is truly amazing. Lisa and Ian, I can't thank you enough for coming on today and sharing the story. And agree, we could have had 2 hours, we could have had 3, we could have actually even gone almost probably 4. And I think we've only just scratched the surface, and there's a lot of myths we now need to work together on, and maybe using modern day technology creatively to tell that story and engage with youth and those coming through education to kind of get engaged and maybe rewire and understand the other stories that are out there. So just as a really good kind of way forward, where can more people find information out about this? You've got a website coming together.
Well, we hope so. We're still chasing the money.
Brilliant.
But we are going to do it, and we will. I mean, it's a bit like everybody. You know, you could find the Volvo Ocean Race thing, so we know how to do that. We've actually started building it. We're putting it all together, the equipment. So now I'm just sort of chasing around, making sure we can find the kind of resources to make the stories that, like Lisa's, so that they are there. It is a legacy that should come from Tuia 250 that is for all of our kids for the future.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you very, very much. And thank you to those watching at home and Callaghan Innovation for sponsoring Techweek TV. We look forward to seeing you very shortly for our next session. Have a great morning and we'll see you soon.